So, welcome. My name is Henrik Berggren. I will be your host today, and my daily job is heading up the pre-sales in the Nordic region. So I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden. And the seminar today is really going to be about the basics around the LogPoint solution, and also I'm going to finish with a short demo. So a short agenda is just a short introduction to the company and who we are, and then go through the product a little bit in terms of both architecture and just the basic, how the system sort of hangs together. And then also a little bit about the architecture in terms of scaling and so on. So once that's been all presented, and so we will do a demo. So I'll show you the user interface and how you sort of move around in the system and do some specific things. And I thought we could finish off with the questions and answers. So if you have questions that come up during my presentation, I would really appreciate it if you either put them in the chat. There's also a Q&A button, I think, in the Zoom interface that you have. So you can just post your questions there and we can go through them at the end of the session, if that's fine with you. All right, so let's get started. So LogPoint is a company that produces a solution called a SIEM platform. And SIEM is one of those Gartner acronyms. It stands for Security and Information Event Management, Security Information and Event Management. And it's really sort of a fancy name for centralized log management with analysis on top of that. So it's a term that's been around for many years, but maybe not so known outside the sort of the people who work with it like we do. The company, LogPoint, as such, is a Scandinavian company. We were founded in Copenhagen, Denmark, back in 2003. And I think the first few years, the focus was mainly on vulnerability scanning and penetration tests, those kind of services. But since 2009, which is actually when I joined the company, we have been fully focusing on the log management with the SIEM product. And we actually renamed the company into LogPoint shortly after that. So, for the better part of 12 years, we've been focusing 100% on this. And it's been quite a trip for me, who has been with the company for so long. We've grown in a fantastic rate, especially these last few years. As I said, Scandinavia is our home market, but we've grown into the European continent over the years. We have our own offices, in France, Germany, UK, and so on. And we are also present in Asia and in the US. And we're also very lucky to have a really good partner or channel that can provide additional services and value on top of our solution in terms of both providing LogPoint as a service. They can provide SOC services, they can provide consulting, installations, workshops, all that stuff that might be needed in some cases to satisfy your needs. We also have a very strong technical platform that has been certified according to something called EAL3+. That's called common criteria in Europe generally, and it's called maybe in the US NATO certification. So that's something that has been required by some customers who work in the defense sector. And we quite recently renewed that certification as well last year. So at the moment, we're about 200, over 200 employees, but we're growing quite rapidly at the moment, both in terms of sales, but also in terms of employees. I think we're aiming to be 300 by the end of the year. And one of the reasons is the strong market, despite the pandemic. It's been 2020 was a really good year for us. We really broke all our estimated goals. And we also got some additional funding from a German investor. So it's really full speed across the line here at LogPoint at the moment. Anyway, so what is this SIEM thing then? As I said, it's really based on centralized log management and analysis. And sort of the sector where this comes from originally is really in the cybersecurity space, since it aims to build a valid historical traceability. You store the logs, and you have sort of a paper trail of what's been going on in your environment. That is also securely stored and secure from manipulation, so it has a value. Also, if there's a legal process at the end result. So that's really where it comes from, for doing investigations, incident investigations, and so on. And quite tightly connected to that is compliance in various forms. So we have a lot of compliance and regulations we need to adhere to. So for many years we've had ISO 27000, various integrity laws, for patients or for citizens. And of course, GDPR has really also increased the focus on these kind of solutions, since that's really geared towards protecting the individual. And the sensitive information you typically need to protect, as according to GDPR, is typically stored in applications, which has also meant that the focus for these kind of systems has also changed a little bit from not just being the infrastructure and switches and firewalls and domain controllers. It's also now including applications to a much larger extent than it used to be. And also in Europe, we have something called the NIS directive for national critical infrastructure. That also includes, systems that manage, water provisioning or energy or whatever like that, which is also sort of an enlargement of the market and the footprint of these kind of systems that LogPoint presents. So that's compliance. Once you have a system like this in place, I would say all customers also realize that this is a great tool for IT operations, just for general old school troubleshooting, keeping tabs on particular systems, how they are running, that that there are no hiccups anywhere, and being much more proactive on that respect, and in return, decreasing downtime and risks for those kind of incidents. And then last but not least, we also have business analytics. And again, with the increased sort of trend of importing also applications, you can get a lot of value out of a system like LogPoint. For instance, in Sweden, where I work, we are working with several hospitals and medical regions in analyzing the activities in the medical journal systems, who has been looking at which patients and so on, and specific criteria for alerting and so on. So business analytics is definitely becoming a bigger part of the solution as well. Okay, so our product portfolio is really based on what we call the core SIEM product, which is sort of the basic LogPoint system. Now, that actually contains most of the stuff that you would normally need. So it's really packaged in a very complete way, in functionality wise. So there are actually very few extras you can buy for LogPoint. One is called UEBA. That's another Gartner acronym. It stands for User and Entity Behavior Analytics. And it's really, again, fancy names on applying machine learning on specific bits of information in the logs to automatically detect, for instance, a user who starts behaving in an unusual way. So that's something that you can buy as an extra to LogPoint, and it's also licensed separately. But it's also an area where customers are really interested in investing to increase the value of the solution, also offloading their own staff. So we're going to talk more about the UEBA shortly. Then we have something called Applied Analytics, which provides a very simple web interface for users that are not part of the IT department, but still need to maybe be part of a process where you approve reports, for instance. So Applied Analytics was initially developed for the healthcare sector, where there is a need to do those kind of checks of reports in the medical departments and doctors' offices and so on, and to be able to push that process into the organization with, of course, with full control of permissions and so on. So that product is now so flexible, it can be applied to other sort of applications as well. But so we could think about financial applications, whatever. So that's also something that is possible to add to your LogPoint solution. Then these other parts, there are a couple of APIs built into the basic product. So those are, you get them for free when you buy LogPoint. One is the search API, so that an external application can search the logs. And the other one is an incident API that can handle the alerts and alarms that you set up in LogPoint. And that API is in turn used by, for instance, some SOAR platforms. So, for instance, Palo Alto has the Cortex X SOAR platform for building playbooks and automatic scripts when you have a specific event coming up, for instance. So those platforms utilize the APIs at the fullest. We also have a function for ingesting threat intel feeds. So LogPoint does not provide any feeds, but we have a function that allows you to ingest feeds that you might have access to. So for instance, we support a number of vendors such as Proofpoint, Critical Stack, and also Recorded Future. So I'm going to show you that in the demo. But also several standard formats like Stix Taxi and MISP, for instance, if you have available threat intel in that format. You can also create your own as a CSV file and use that. And what you do is you can then use that to match information in your logs towards your threat intelligence and get something we call an enrichment of those logs with a risk score and a description of the threat and so on. And you can then take that to the next level where you perhaps create an alert or a report or something like that. So we're going to get back to these things. This is just an overview, but I would say you in the core SIEM, the basic product, you get a lot of stuff in one package. And the basis for working with this is actually based on importing a lot of logs from different sources. So you will be pulling a lot of data into your SIEM platform. And the more data you pull in, typically the more value you will get out of it. So we have a license model that is, as far as I know, unique in the industry in that we only license on the number of log sources. And we do not license, we don't have any licensing that is related to data volumes in terms of events per second or gigabytes per day or the size of the archive, or not even the number of LogPoint servers you deployed matters, or the number of users in the LogPoint system doesn't matter either, just the number of log sources. So if you have 500 log sources, let's say, 300 switches and 200 servers, whatever, you buy a 500 node license from LogPoint and it's a flat fee per year, no surprises. And it includes support and new versions and updates and also a lot of other stuff that I'll come back to. So the licensing is kind of central in this, since it makes the technology, it really enables you to use the technology to its fullest. It's also been a major success for us in terms of becoming the platform in many of the large service providers' offerings. So we have several large global partners that provide SIEM as a service or similar services like security operating centers or SOCs. And they use LogPoint as their platform since it's a predictable licensing. They know what it's going to cost, regardless of what the customers, what happens in the customers' networks that they are providing the service for. So just keep that in mind as well. All right, so the product itself then, if we get back to that, it's really about finding the needle in the haystack in many senses, making sense of all the noise. A typical environment would normally generate millions of logs every day, and just a few of them would be super critical to keep an eye on. So from LogPoint's perspective, when you start shooting logs from a vast variety of log sources, you may have switches, firewalls, domain controllers, maybe radio servers, VPN endpoints, malware and antivirus systems, and so on and so forth, plus applications. All these different devices, they create logs that are very different between themselves in terms of structure, content, and format, and so on. So from LogPoint's perspective, this is, big mass of unstructured data that comes pouring in. So the first step we do when we receive the data is try to create a structure. We call that process normalization. So what that does in short is that we scan through every packet that we receive and we tag the information in the logs. So for instance, from a firewall log, we would tag the source address, destination address, source port, destination port, protocol, and so on. In a Windows packet, maybe we would tag, the event ID, the source address as well, maybe a user, an action, and so on. So there will be different tags for different types of logs, but as far as we can, we will use the same name on those tags for the same kind of information. So if there's a username in a log, for instance, we will tag it with the tag user, regardless if it comes from a Cisco switch or a Microsoft server or an application. So you can search across systems easily just using these tags. It makes it a lot easier to work. So sometimes I also compare these tags to, another way to look at this is to compare the tags to columns in a virtual spreadsheet. So you can start working with the logs in a much more organized way and, filter and sort and create tables and graphs. And that's what you do in the analysis phase. So that's pretty much the basic flow. In the real world, it could look like this. You have a lot of logs coming in various shapes and forms. And again, the raw logs can be really challenging to look at and search and understand and so on. So what we do during the normalization phase is this. You see here an example from a Windows server. You see the raw log in black at the bottom. And on top of that, you see pretty much the same information, but it's been tagged. So here you have the tag user. You have the event ID, you have a domain, you have an event category, and you have a computer name, and so on. So these tags can then be used to create tables and more elaborate graphs and apply more sort of advanced analytics on top of those. But it makes it so much more easy to work with information in the logs when you have it structured in this way. So again, we support a lot of different log sources. And when you look at it, there are a number of standardized formats, especially on the infrastructure side. There's a number of well-established standards like syslog, for example. And of course, we support those. But the higher up you go into the application layer, you will get less and less standardization, I would say. And a typical application doesn't send any logs anywhere, just writes stuff into a database or a text file. So we can also fetch that into LogPoint. We can read a database by using an SQL query towards the database. That's, for instance, how we retrieve the audit logs from the medical journal systems. We can also read text files, and we treat this information like any other. So we tag the information and just process it further down the chain. Also, cloud services are becoming much, more and more popular, and we support several of those as well, including Office 365, obviously, and the Azure Event Hub and Defender ATP, for instance. So cloud services, those are fine to ingest into LogPoint. And again, the first step we do is normalizing them, tagging the information. The next step is voluntary, but you can actually add information from an external source as well. We call that enrichment. So one very common form of enrichment is called IP to host, where we can ask the LogPoint server to look up the host name based on an IP address in the log and add that host name and store it together with the raw log in the archive. So that when you look at the log weeks or months later, you will see this is the machine that had this IP address at this point in time. Which makes it so much easier not having to cross-reference other logs and so on. Another very common enrichment is using LDAP to import a number of attributes from Active Directory. And then you can use that table to enrich logs from, for instance, the domain controllers. So let's say you have a packet with just a username. In my case, it might be HB. And then you can look up and add those attributes to the raw log. So it says, it's Henrik Berggren. He's at the technical department. He's based in Stockholm. He has this email address and all that stuff, which makes the reports and alerts and other stuff so much easier to read and understand. And also, if you have a help desk working with the system, for instance, it makes their job much easier. So those are, typical enrichments that are being done by many, many customers. You can also enrich from your own data using a database or a CSV file. And from this perspective, also the threat intel looks like an enrichment source. It will actually, like I said, it will match information in your logs towards the threat intel you've imported and enrich those logs with a threat score and a description. And same with the UEBA, the machine learning part. It will also enrich logs with risk score and what kind of anomaly or deviation it's seeing in a behavior. So and that then goes into the storage, which is built from so-called repositories. And you can build a very flexible storage using these repositories, in that you can store logs from different sources into different repositories. And for each repository, you can define for how long you want to store the logs. So you can store different logs for different amounts of time. Some logs for 3 months, others for 6, others for 18 months, and so on. And if you have a huge amount of logs, a huge amount of data, or very long retention periods you need to keep, then you can also distribute a repository across multiple storage devices. So you can build your archive really efficiently like that. You can also set different permissions for your LogPoint users so that not all users can look into all the repositories. So you can close down some repositories that contain more sensitive information, for instance. So, the basic architecture is quite flexible and sort of easy to get around and understand and configure. Now, I mentioned the tagging a number of times. So that's really important to have in place to get the maximum value. Even though, I go back one slide, when we store the logs in the archive, we do not store them in the database. Instead, we just store the logs as flat files. And at the same time as we write them on disk, we also index the contents. So you can free text search in the logs any way you like. You can just Google away. You can use wildcards, logical operators, and so on. You can also mix it with tags and their values. And it really allows you to use the data really flexibly. So the tagging, again, is sort of important. So it's not our intention that you should do this yourselves. So we have a customer portal, which you will have access to as a customer. And among other things, it contains something called application packs. So we have actually developed support or integrations for probably over 200 vendors today. So if you have a reasonably standardized environment, we are most likely covering most of that out of the box. So this page here will have all those application packs. And this is a very live list that was, we keep adding new products and new versions and so on to it. And a package like this would contain both the normalization logic for tagging the logs, but typically also contains maybe ready-made dashboards, ready-made report templates, and ready-made alert rules. So you will get a flying start when you start deploying your LogPoint system. So that's nice. Also, the user interface is, I'm going to show you that in more detail in a second. It's quite graphical and also easy to navigate, and can provide a lot of key information points just at a glance like this. We also have the UEBA, like I mentioned, the machine learning part that has its own dashboard that will sort of map up the events that it's been identifying, so you can easily sort and filter those and drill down into the individual events. So, and sort of one of the really strong points with this is, of course, it's unsupervised, it's self-learning, so it's a great complementary solution to traditional alerts, which also have a valid space, where you have some kind of a threshold you define for particular events. Let's say if you have more than 100 locked accounts in an hour, something is wrong, or if anyone ever tries to log into this host outside office hours, I want to know about it. Those kind of alerts are of course valid. This is on top of that, self-learning, just finding unusual behaviors in general. So they coexist very nicely. All right, last, before I go into the user interface, I just sort of finish off with a few words on scaling. So many customers we have are of the medium or large size, maybe also with multiple data centers or multiple sites around the world, whatever. So it's actually quite easy to scale a LogPoint configuration. So a typical starting point would be that you deploy one server that does everything. So this would be your central LogPoint server that will collect and normalize and index and store all the logs. And you will point your browser to that same machine to get your user interface, your web interface, to search and create reports and dashboards and so on, and alerts. So later, if you see you have a need to expand your footprint with the LogPoint solution, let's say you have an additional site, you can add another LogPoint server at that site. So now we have two LogPoint servers running in two different sites, doing local log collection and local storage in those sites, but you can connect them together with a VPN tunnel, and you can see everything as one big archive in the user interface. So it's really transparent to the user. And then if you have a very intense environment with a lot of logs and many events per second, you can actually front two or more LogPoints with a load balancer that will distribute the load across two or more LogPoint servers. So this, again, we have several customers running in this kind of setup, which will both give you sort of a more performance or more capacity in the log collection capacity, but also give you some extra availability in that you can actually bring one of these servers down for maintenance, for instance, without interrupting the log collection process. So this is certainly used by many customers. Then on top of this, you can actually start dividing the roles between your LogPoint servers. So you can sort of designate a couple, like in this case, you have two yellow marked boxes that we call backends. Those will be the ones that actually receive the logs and normalize them and store and index them, right? Whereas this LogPoint server here will not be receiving any logs. It would just be connected to the backends with VPN tunnels, and that will be providing the user interface. So the user will just point to this central search ad and will be able to look at any or all of these backends in one go. So this is a very common scenario when we start out with a distributed multi-site environment, and also very common for our partners that sell LogPoint as a service to set this up, with a LogPoint installation at each customer, and then the partner has a central search ad where their SOC, for instance, can have monitor everything like this. Then you can also deploy a LogPoint server that you put in sort of a different mode called a collection mode. This unit will just receive the logs and normalize the logs, and then send them to a central backend for storage over a VPN tunnel. So this was originally developed for instance, being deployed in a DMZ, but it's also being used by customers, for instance, who have production sites in countries where internet access might not be 100% reliable. So this can actually also buffer on disk locally if you have any interruptions on this connection here. So we have, for instance, Swedish industrial customers who have production sites around the world, and they collect everything back to their headquarters here in Sweden. using this kind of a scenario or this kind of architecture. And last but not least, you can involve cloud services. You can run any of these components in the cloud, Azure or Amazon or whatever. And you can have a mix here. You can run also LogPoint components on dedicated hardware servers. You can run it in virtual environments, and as I said, also in cloud environments. So whatever makes sense for your needs, you can work with the architectural components to cover that. And again, the licensing is not playing into this. You have full freedom in designing this architecture as you go along, without it impacting your licensing. So that's really nice too. Okay, so I think I'll stop there and change into the demo system that we have. So this is what the user interface looks like. It's a graphical web interface. Divided into 5 sections. You have the dashboard section we're looking at now. You also have a search section where you can search the logs manually. You can save searches and just click on them to run them again. And you can also create something called search templates. And the search template is very similar to a dashboard like this, but you can also add some fields on the right-hand side where the user can add some filters, and the whole thing will change according to what you type into those fields. So those are very handy too. Then we have the report section where you can create report templates. You can schedule reports. You can set them up to be emailed automatically every week, every month, and so on. And then we have the incident section. This is where all the alerts that you create will end up if they are triggering. So here you can go in and have a look at them in more detail and look at the logs that were behind the alert that triggered. But as part of setting up an alert in LogPoint, you can also set the alert up to send an email when this happens. So you can have an email sent into your service desk, for instance. You can have a trap, an SNMP trap sent to your network monitoring system. You can have it to run scripts and also send syslog packages to some other systems. So you have several ways of getting sort of a real-time reaction out of the system. And that's sort of the most common way of integrating with whatever a customer already has in his or her network. But as I said, there's also an API on top of this that you can use if you want. And last but not least, over here, we have the settings where configure the system and so on. Now you can see here, I'm actually logged in with a shared account, since this is a demo system. So I'm using a shared demo account. But in a normal production system, you would have your personal credentials, obviously. So that works in LogPoint so that you create groups in LogPoint, user groups, and you also assign permissions to those groups. So which repositories they should be able to access, if they only have read-only rights, for instance, for a service desk, or if they're also administrators or able to sort of change and create stuff. So you have different roles you can create, and then you can add users to those groups, but you can also map those groups to groups in your Active Directory using LDAP so that you can log in with your AD credentials. And we have several ways of authentication in LogPoint. We have local authentication, we have LDAP, we have SAML and ADFS, Radius, and also something called OAuth2. So we're usually able to integrate with whatever the customer has from before in terms of single sign-on or whatever. Okay, so that's that. So every user can then build his or her own environment with different dashboard. You have a dashboard divided into tabs, and each dashboard in that is then divided into so-called widgets. Excuse me. So a widget is a graph or a table in a dashboard, and it's being updated every few seconds, as you can see. And this is an AD dashboard that contains some stuff around Active Directory events, such as locked accounts or unlocked accounts, or maybe if you are trying to log in with the same username from more than one machine at the same time and for different geographies, or if you try to log in on disabled accounts, maybe someone who has left the company or whatever. So we have probably 10 or 12 dashboards just for Active Directory that looks at, user activities, machine activities, changes in groups and policies and all that stuff. So again, you have a really good starting point here. We also have, as I said, support for Office 365. So there are several dashboards also for Office 365 and alert rules and reports and so on. So behind each and every of these so-called widgets, there is a query, there's a search criteria that is pulling this information from the archive and presenting it. So if I click on this little arrow here, you will see the definition of this particular graph here. So this is a search string. We also see that we are looking into one repository from one LogPoint server over the range of the last 24 hours. So this is where the user might start to be aware that there might be more than one repository and more than one LogPoint server. So it's kind of well hidden really for the user, this architectural stuff. Down here, you can also choose how you want to present this graphically, different types of graph options. And those will also change a little bit depending on how you have created your graph. Then you can also go in here and actually edit it completely from scratch. So you can change the name of it, you can tweak the query, you can change which repositories it should look into. We're now looking into the Windows repository here. You can also change the time range for it. So you can really sort of adjust it to your likings. You can also tick this little box here, expose widget to public URL. I'll show what that gives you. That gives you an extra little icon here. So if I click that, I will get this graph in a new browser window. And this string here, you can push that to a screen, maybe on your network monitoring screen, or you can have it on a screen in your coffee room or on a website or something. So this does not require you to be logged into LogPoint. This will still be updated every few seconds, just like the sort of the original widget. So it's easy just to get stuff out of the system like that. And then, of course, you can also, if you see something that is, first of all, if you see something right now that is looking strange, you can click on this report button here to create a snapshot of the entire dashboard here. It's kind of big, right? So we can create one PDF snapshot of the entire dashboard and send that to a colleague or to a customer or whatever who needs to look at it, or put it into a case file. I can also click on anything in these graphs. If I click on a bar like this, I will get a number of choices here. And again, a little bit depending on what the graph is showing, I will get some different choices, but one that I will always get is this one, view logs. So I can go in and look at the raw logs behind that bar, all 16,000 of them. So if I click view logs, I will get transferred into the search module or search section, and I will get those logs up on screen. Hold on, see what's happening here. So I'm not sure why not. So maybe I got thrown out. I'll just refresh. Hold on. Oh, it just came by. Yeah, I need to log in again. Sorry for that. Right, so here's the search string that came from the graph when I clicked on that part. And the actual bar that I clicked on was this user administrator. So I got all that stuff straight from the graph. I also got the repository, the Windows repository, and the time range, the last 24 hours. So here I also have now a histogram that shows me how many logs that match my criteria over the last 24 hours. So each of these bars is worth 1 hour. And histograms are really good to see if you have peaks or something starts or ends or something like that. So if you pretend that this is a peak, I can just pull my mouse across it to zoom in. So now every bar is worth just 6 minutes. So it's easy to zoom in. I can also go up here and change to something else, like a custom range. Let's say something happened last Thursday, I can start there. So navigating in time is actually quite easy. And then down here, you have all those logs in the raw format and all the tags. And then out here, we also have some of those tags in a list. So we can see here, for instance, that out of these 2,000 something logs I have here, I have 4 domains in those logs and 3 different hosts. The user is administrator, but what he has been doing is actually deleting accounts. And you can see the accounts he has deleted are the target users here. So these are the ones he has been deleting. And I can just go in here and click on the LogPoint bank domain, for instance. That will be added to my criteria up here. So now I'm just looking at the target users part of that domain. I can look at Mark, for instance. Now I'm just looking at Mark's logs, for instance. So I can get quite far just by clicking on stuff. And I can also click on stuff in the logs themselves. So I can click on LogPoint bank. I can click on an event task like that. It will just be added up here, as you see, as additional criteria. So just by clicking around, you can get quite far just by drilling down. So I'll show you another example. If you go into the dashboard again, and maybe we should look at something else. We have some more dashboards here. We have, for instance, Nessus, which is vulnerability scanning. It's a great log source, really, to have a good, some good data on which are your most vulnerable hosts. And if you also then have threat intelligence enabled, you could quite easily see if you have any traffic between your vulnerable hosts and some of the worst hosts you see in your threat intelligence. That should be a major alert, right? So if you look at the threat intelligence, we have both here a sort of a more generic threat intelligence dashboard. We also have in this particular demo environment, we also have the recorded future threat intel feed, which is an excellent threat intel feed. So here we have a number of different activities. We can see that even my demo logs got caught in recorded futures threat intel. And here's, for instance, we have the top 10 breaches according to recorded future, and that is matching stuff that I have in my own logs in my own environment. We can also see here anomalous connections detected. So for instance, here you can see a number of different source addresses. You can see protocols. You can also see destination addresses, and also something called evidence category. So you see this is a command and control servers. And if you go down here, you see that it's actually actively communicating command and control servers. So what I would do there, I would actually click on that. And again, I get this pop-up, right? That will give me some options. And here I will then say drill down by action. You see here, action is allow and drop and deny. So obviously the firewall has actually dropped a lot of this stuff. There's some stuff that has come through by being allowed through the firewall. So if I click on this action here, drill down by action, I get transferred into the search window again, but this time it actually gets sorted by the action since I chose that. So here I can actually see that there are some allows here, 77 logs. I can click on the enlarging glass. And now I'll get into the raw logs. This is actually stuff that went through my firewall. And I can see here that it's actually just one destination and source address involved here, right? So, and the destination address here is, this is not looking very good. So what I can do is I can go in here, you see the destination address here. And with Recorded Future, we have a really nice integration. I can do a click on this little arrow to the right of this, and I can drill forward in Recorded Future. And when I do that, I get all the information they have about this. And this is a really bad one, apparently, a very high risk score. They tag it as very malicious. We can see other information they have on it, and recent references, and so on. So that's, quite easy to drill down and identify that this is something I need to, really dig into and have some action on. So now I can go to search. This is the starting page in the search, and I have my whole search history here. So if I click on that again and click on the allow, I can also see that this is the source address. This is my internal host. This is the host that has been hit by this. So this is the host I need to go to and take some measures. All right. So, and then if we again go back to the dashboard, I can also show you quickly the UEBA. So this is the machine learning side of things. So the machine learning algorithms can be set up to analyze specific so-called entities and users that you define. So this is licensed separately, as I said. So for instance, you might have 500 log sources. That is sort of the core LogPoint license, but you might have 2,000 users. So that's why they are separately licensed. Anyway, so in this example, we have analyzed 115 million events. And out of those 150 million, it seems that 2,500 are seen as somewhat unusual. And they are in turn divided across these so-called entities, 10 users, 5 websites, number of servers and shares. And you can also see our overall risk score has gone up lately. So something is going on here. And I can now click on users here to see which users or websites and so on. I can just click directly on those. Or I can go up here to the Explore tab, which will give me an overview of all the events. So now we're looking at the events in the last 24 hours, and we can see some red events here, high risk or extreme risk events. I can also see here the users that are related to these events. I can also choose servers and websites and so on. But we can see that this guy, Henry Ford, has a really high risk score. Our theoretical maximum is 100. So 87 is really high. So I can now filter up here by typing stuff, or I can just click on Henry to filter on him. And I can see that he was actually the reason for these red events. So if I scroll down here, let me see, from the beginning, we can, for instance, see here that he has accessed a shared drive 38 times in an hour, which is unusual for Henry. We would have expected maybe 4. So this is kind of unusual. It's not the end of the world. It's not, maybe not a biggie, but it's slightly out of the ordinary. Then we can also see that in about the same time frame, he has also accessed a lot of projects, which is far more than we would have expected. So now his risk score is being moved up by the UEBA. And remember, this is done completely automatically. No rules have been set, no thresholds, nothing. It's just analyzing Henry according to his normal baseline. Then we can also see that he worked in a time of day that was unusual for Henry. So now his risk score is added even more. And probably by now you would have gotten an alert. And if not before, you would get it now, because now we actually pushed a lot of data out, 1.3 gigs. And in each of these pop-ups, you can always click on the Explore Raw Events button. So you will get into the search again and see the logs behind that particular event. So here we actually see, this is apparently when something happened. We see the logs down here, and we have, all these other informations over here. So fully automatically now, the UEBA has identified that this user has sent this amount of data to this particular destination. So we know who did what, and we know when, and we also know from where. We have his workstation name here somewhere, and if not, we can always look into the domain controller logs and get the workstation name for this time frame. So again, we have the basic information we need to continue our investigation to see, did Henry do this on purpose, or do we have any signs that he was infected, his machine was infected or remote controlled or whatever? And did this happen in the office or remotely and all that stuff? Since we have the logs from the other sites, does it show up in any of the malware products that we have? Do we have any indications? So that's this sort of strength of having everything in one place. So also here we can click on Henry Ford here, and I can have a look at him in one of the search templates. So I can go straight from here into a search template. So I just click on the threat hunting template, and you can see Henry has been pre-populated here. These are the fields where you can add your own filters, and I just click update. We can see what we have here. So here we can actually collect information from any number of log sources in one place. So from the UEBA, for instance, maybe from some Windows servers, Active Directory, some LDAP data. We have also some other alerts that have been firing according to the MITRE attack. So this is great for someone investigating. You have everything in one place, and you can continue your investigation from here. So last but not least, I just thought I'd show you that anything you search for can be turned into an alert rule. And when an alert rule fires, it will create an incident. And all those are listed here, the ones that have happened recently then. So there's also a sort of a simple workflow here. You can set up groups to handle your alerts. You can share the ownership of them. You can also assign them between yourselves, and you can resolve them like this. You can reopen it. You can comment it with something and post that, and you can view the data behind the alert. So I just click on that. I'm not sure what this is, but some colleague of mine has done some alert. So this is the data behind it. So it's actually quite easy to work with. You can go up here, and also if I want to transfer this to some colleague, I just click it and I go up here and I reassign it to someone else. Let's see if I have that set up here. So I can reassign it to the SOC user, for instance. So there's a simple workflow, but again, as I said, you can also set these alerts up to send emails and traps and so on, which is typically how we integrate with whatever you have from before in terms of service desk system or similar. So with that, I think I'll just stop since the clock is running, and just see if we have any questions. So I need to probably stop sharing to see that. Do we have any questions? No one has written in the chat, at least as far as I can see. Anyone who wants to open up with a question? I hope this was what you were expecting to see, and that it gave you some insights in what you can use the system for. And hopefully you can visualize also that it would actually simplify your work in your own environments and save a bunch of time when you need to do these investigations. Plus that you can work so much more proactively with both anything from operational stability to your security posture. And by bringing the information from all these different sources into one place like this, you would also most likely get more sort of value out of the investments you already done in your other products, your firewalls and your anti-malware and antivirus systems and so on. So that is sort of the big benefit of these systems. All right. No questions so far. So I would just leave you with one more thing. So I'll share my screen again and show you something. So if you want to, I'm sure you, or I hope you are are curious to get to know more about LogPoint and so on. So there is actually a really good site. It's called https://docs.logpoint.com. This is an open site where you can see all our documentation. So here you have everything about the core LogPoint system, everything from an overview to how you install it and configure it, and then how you use it, how you search and create dashboards, complete with screenshots and examples and all that. You also have the API references here if you want to see how you can, work with APIs. So if we just click something here, you can see, for instance, the search API, exactly how that works, together with examples and so on, right? And you can also see the UEBA here. So the UEBA is described here in great detail, and what it will provide you in terms of various alerts and so on. And you also have a lot of other information on additional functionality you can add to your LogPoint server. This is also part of your basic licensing. So this is not costing anything extra either. So here, for instance, is the Office 365 fetcher. So if you click on that, you will see all the stuff that you're getting, how you install it, how you configure it, and how you use it. And just by adding this application into your LogPoint system, you can then pull information from Azure Active Directory, SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, and so on. And you get all of this stuff. You get search templates, you get alert packages, you get dashboards and report packages. So you really get a good starting point for continuing your work with LogPoint. Okay, so it's almost 4 o'clock. I hope this was useful. Please reach out to your local LogPoint office or to us or to anyone in Copenhagen, or just email to info@logpoint.com if you want more information or come in contact with someone. And if there are no more questions, I will just close the meeting there and wish you a nice evening. Thank you.